the Spheres of Olduvai. I didn't notice the humming at first. It was midday in Olduvai Gorge, and the sun had turned the red earth into a kiln. The wind moved in thin, irritated gusts, pushing grit into the seams of our equipment cases. Everyone was talking at once: survey lines, drone batteries, the last satellite upload, until Dr. Sarai Endige lifted a stone from the dust as gently as if it were sleeping. It looked like nothing worth saving. A fist-sized spheroid of basalt, dark, battered, almost polite in its simplicity, not a meteorite, not a fossil, not a carved idol, just a stone that time had worried into a near-perfect sphere. Except it wasn't perfect. Along its surface were small scars, chips, crescent bites, bright edges where ancient fractures had resisted the slow varnish of age. Those scars caught the sunlight like teeth. Sarai rolled it in her palm. "Alduin spheroid," she said, "or what people call one, a whole career for some right here." I smiled because that was expected of me. I was the computational guy, the one flown in to translate stone into data and data into something fundable. I nodded like the pattern was familiar, like I could tell at a glance whether a prehistoric hand had meant to do this. Truth, I'd never held a piece of deep time before. When I took it from her, it felt heavier than its size, as if the gorge itself clung to it. And then the humming began. Not in my ears. In my bones. A soft vibration like a tuning fork pressed to the wrist, so faint it could have been imagined, and yet the longer I held the stone, the more certain I became. Something inside it was trying to match my pulse. I set it down quickly on a foam pad. The sensation ended with a clean, surgical suddenness. Sarai watched me without blinking. "You felt it," she said. I opened my mouth, and for a moment there was nothing to say that sounded sane. The gorge stretched around us, layered like burnt pages. Hyenas laughed somewhere beyond the ridge, the way they do when they want you to know they've already chosen your bones. I felt something, I admitted. Sarai did not look satisfied. She looked relieved. "Good," she whispered, "then it's not only me." That was the day we began pretending our work was archaeology. And the day, without knowing it, we began restoring a trajectory that had been aimed at Earth long before anyone gave this planet a name. We called our system Orbit because grant proposals like single, confident words. Officially, Orbit was an AI-assisted reconstruction pipeline, scanning a stone at microscale, mapping every fracture line, modeling each impact required to produce the observed geometry, then replaying those impacts in reverse to estimate the original sequence of strikes. A forensic timeline for the oldest tools on Earth. A way to answer a question that had haunted paleoanthropology for decades. Why were these stones so round? Some researchers said the spheroids were hammerstones reshaped by use, pounded against bones and roots until corners disappeared. Others argued intentional shaping, early hominins learning to impose symmetry, the first whisper of aesthetics, or the first step toward projectile technology. Sarai disliked both camps. She had spent years in the gorge, watching the land yield objects that refused to behave like artifacts, stones that looked worked but carried no clear function, flakes that fit no typology, patterns that danced just out of reach. "Everyone wants purpose," she told me on the first night in camp, as the sky filled with hard, indifferent stars. But what if purpose isn't the point? What if they were doing something else to the world itself? I assumed it was the fatigue talking. Now I wish I had listened harder. Our team was small by necessity. Fieldwork budgets shrink like frightened animals. Sarai, the lead archaeologist, was the spine of the operation, sharp, patient, impossible to intimidate. Kei Tanaka, our AI engineer, had a laugh that sounded like relief in eyes that never stopped tracking invisible graphs. I was brought in as the computational physicist, fracture mechanics, inverse problems, the kind of work where you convince chaos to reveal its rules. We had a portable scanner that could capture the surface of a stone down to microns, and a rugged workstation with enough GPU power to heat a tent. What we didn't have, what Sarah insisted we needed, was honesty. On the third day, after the scanners had finished their first batch, she called us into the shade of the supply tarp. "Look," she said, and put the spheroid from the first day in my hands again. The humming returned, faint but insistent. "Do you feel it?" she asked Kay. Kay swallowed, "Yes." She looked at me. I wanted to lie. I wanted to say this was field delirium, the brain making ghosts in the heat. I wanted to be the sane one. Instead I said, "Yes." Sarai nodded like a verdict had been delivered. "This isn't a story about what our ancestors made," she said. "It's a story about what they tried to contain." Kay blinked. "Contain what?" Sarai's gaze drifted to the stars, even though it was broad daylight. "Something that fell," she said. "Something that didn't land cleanly." Then she turned back to us, and her voice hardened into a professional tone. "Run orbit, not for function, for intention." I didn't know how to model intention, but I knew how to model impacts. And so, while hyenas argued in the scrub and vultures drew circles that meant nothing to them, we fed ancient stones into an algorithm built to reconstruct violence. At first, orbit behaved like any ambitious system. It failed loudly and often. A spheroid is a record of collision. Every chip is a memory of an edge-meeting force. But basalt fractures in ways that are sensitive to hidden flaws, to temperature, to the exact angle of strike. Reverse engineering that from a finished object is like trying to guess every step of a dance from the shape of worn floorboards. We had to train orbit on controlled experiments. Modern basalt cores struck under measured conditions, captured with high-speed cameras, their fragments cataloged in obsessive detail. We built libraries of signature scars, fracture morphologies associated with certain angles, velocities, and tool materials. Kay's model became a creature that learned hunger. Feed it a stone and it demanded more. More scans, more reference strikes, more compute. On day 9, it produced something we could publish. A plausible sequence of impacts for a particular spheroid. 14 strikes, alternating faces, each hit designed to remove a ridge while leaving a counterbalancing mass. The kind of intentional shaping that would make a typologist nod. Sarai did not nod. She stared at the projected sequence, then at the stone itself, and then at me. "It's too clean," she said. I frowned. Clean is good. Clean means we understand the process. Sarai shook her head slowly. Clean means it's lying. Reality rarely grants us clean. Kay cleared their throat. "We can increase stochastic variance, add noise to the simulations." "Don't add noise," Sarai said. "Find the signal." Her finger traced a cluster of chips on the spheroid's surface. 3 scars closed together, like a set of punctuation marks. "Those," she said, "orbit treats them like error, like overstrike, but look at the spacing, look at the orientation." I leaned closer. The chips were not random. Their arcs aligned, not with the stone's center, but with an axis slightly offset, as if someone had been rotating the spheroid around an invisible pole and striking in relation to it. "Run the reconstruction with that axis," Sarai instructed. "Force orbit to assume a rotating frame." Kay hesitated. "That's arbitrary." Sarai smiled without humor, so as assuming they were making hammers. "Try it." Kay adjusted the constraints. Orbit churned. Its output window filled with lines of probabilities, each impact sequence scored and discarded, like a mind searching its own dreams. Then, at 02:17 in the morning, the system produced a result so strange Kay thought it was a bug. The impacts did not minimize effort. They did not maximize roundness. They did something else. They arranged the scars. Not into a tool. into a pattern. Kay zoomed in on the stone's surface map and overlaid the reconstructed strike points. The clusters of chips formed nodes, and the spacing between nodes was consistent across multiple spheroids. Like a code. Like a language that didn't use letters, only absence. Sarai sat very still, as if sudden motion might frighten the discovery away. "What is it?" I asked. Kay's voice dropped to a whisper. "It's coordinate encoding." I laughed once, sharp and involuntary. Coordinates of what? A map of the gorge. Kay shook their head, eyes reflecting the pale glow of the screen. Not local, not geographic. They tapped a key, bringing up Orbit's next inference layer. The model that tried to interpret patterns in strike distributions, trained on everything from crack propagation to human-made mark systems. The suggested mapping had a label that made my stomach tighten. Astrometric fit, high confidence. "No," I said. Sarai exhaled slowly. "Show me," she said. Kay did. They had taken the chip nodes and projected them onto a sphere, assuming the makers had a way of referencing directions. Then they ran an optimization. What coordinate system made this pattern match known distributions? Orbit found one. Not Earth-based. Celestial. A star map. Sarai's hands gripped the edge of the table. "That's impossible," she said. 2 million years ago. "No one could observe star positions precisely," I finished. Kay's eyes were wet. Unless they weren't observing, unless they were remembering. I wanted to dismiss it. I wanted to blame the AI for overfitting, for seeing constellations in noise the way people see faces in clouds. But Orbit wasn't just matching any random star field. It was matching a specific one. 2 million years in the past. It had adjusted for proper motion, stars drifting through the galaxy like slow sparks, and back-projected their positions to a time when early Homo walked these valleys with stone in hand. And the pattern etched in basalt matched. The chips on the stones were not accidents. They were coordinates. Anchors. Addresses. Sarai leaned toward the screen as if she might fall into it. "What are the targets?" she asked. Kay ran the identification. A list appeared, star catalog names and estimated distances, some familiar, some faint. A few were close enough to matter: red dwarfs, sun-like stars, a system with a known exoplanet, a cluster in the galactic disk. But the real shock was not the names. It was the distribution. The coordinates circled something. Not a star. Not a nebula. A point in space that, 2 million years ago, would have been empty. A point that in our time was still empty. A hole in the map. I felt the humming in my bones again, even though my hands weren't touching any stone. "What sits in the center?" I asked. Sarai's voice was barely audible. "Us," she said, "or what came to us." By dawn our camp looked the same. Birds called. The gorge held its layered silence. Only we had changed. You might think the obvious response would be to publish, to call universities, to alert the world that prehistory had left us a star map in basalt. But there are discoveries that do not invite celebration. They invite caution. We tried briefly to behave like scientists. We checked the data. We tested the encoding on a fresh batch of spheroids from different excavation units, different strata. The pattern persisted. The same coordinate system, the same ring around the same empty point. We tried to falsify it. We randomized chip positions and asked Orbit to fit star maps. It produced low-confidence nonsense. We fed it modern damaged stones. It failed to find coherent structure. Only the Olduvai spheroids produced this signal. Sarai grew quieter with each confirmation. On the fourth night after the discovery, she sat outside her tent with a headlamp off, staring into a sky so crowded with stars it felt like being watched. "I used to come here as a student," she said softly, as if confessing. I would sit on this ridge and pretend the gorge was the center of time, like everything began here and stretched outward. She glanced at me. What if it is the center, she asked, but not of time? I didn't answer. I didn't have one. Kay, who had been avoiding sleep as if rest might let the truth catch up, approached with a tablet. Orbit found something else, they said. Sarai turned. What? Kay hesitated, then held out the screen. It showed a new layer of analysis. Chip depth, fracture brightness, microstriations. Orbit had modeled not just where the impacts occurred, but the exact tool hardness and geometry required to produce each scar. At the bottom was a line of text. Impactor material classification. Neolithic probable density, high probable modulus, anomalous. I stared. Non-lithic. What does it think they struck with? Kay swallowed. Something harder than basalt, they said. Something that shouldn't exist in Olduvai toolkits. Sarai's face did not show surprise. It showed something worse, recognition. Show the fracture angles, she said. Kay did. The impacts were not consistent with a handheld hammerstone. Many of the strikes came from directions that would have required the stone to be suspended, rotating, held at precisely controlled orientations, like it was in a rig or an orbit. And the energies were wrong. Too high. As if the impactor had not been swung, but dropped from a fixed height with repeated precision. As if gravity itself had been used as a chisel. I felt my mouth go dry. So, they weren't shaping stones by hand. Sarai's eyes reflected starlight. No, she said, they were using stones to shape something else. Kay's voice cracked. To shape what? Sarai looked down at her own hands, then at the dark gorge beyond camp, where the excavation trenches lay like wounds. To shape a boundary, she said, to polish an edge the world doesn't like to admit it has. The humming returned stronger, and for a moment I thought it was coming from the earth beneath us. Then the tablet in Kay's hands flickered. The screen dimmed. Letters appeared where no output should have been. Not error, not random, not human. Kay dropped the tablet as if it had bitten them. It hit the ground, bounced, and continued to display the message in a steady, calm font. Sarai leaned forward slowly, voice tight. Kay, she said, did you program that? Kay shook their head, so hard their ponytail whipped their cheek. No, they whispered. No, I didn't. The message changed. It learns through you. Then the screen went black. The night around us resumed its silence, but something in that silence had shifted, like the air now contained a new, hidden frequency. I stared at the dead tablet. Orbit is offline, I asked. Kay knelt, trembling fingers probing the device. Battery's fine, it just shut itself. Sarai stood, and for the first time since I met her, she looked afraid. Pack the stones, she said. All of them, we go back to the lab. The university lab, I asked. Sarai shook her head. Not a university, not yet. She looked toward the excavation, toward the gorge's dark throat. We go to the place they started, she said, where the first sphere was made, where the thing first fell. If you've never seen Olduvai at night, you might imagine it as a romantic void, stars above, darkness below. It is not romantic. It is ancient and indifferent, and the darkness feels practiced, like it has been doing its job long enough to be confident. We drove out before sunrise in 2 dusty Land Cruisers, following Sarai's lead. She had not slept. None of us had. The place she took us to was not one of the famous beds. It was a side ravine, narrow and steep, where the sediment layers were exposed in thin, sharp bands. The ground here was littered with basalt cobbles and pale, tough fragments, and the air smelled faintly of minerals and something else, something like wet stone, despite the dryness. This, Sarai said, stepping out of the vehicle, is where the first spheroids were found. Kay glanced around. It looks like everywhere else. Sarai nodded. It's the same rock, the same wind, but the ground remembers. She walked to a cluster of stones, half buried in dust, and knelt. From her pocket, she pulled a magnetometer, standard kit for detecting buried metal or unusual mineral concentrations. She turned it on and passed it over the ground. The device whined once, then dropped into a steady hum. The needle swung toward a patch of tuff that looked no different from the rest. Sarai stared at it, jaw clenched. "It's under there," she said. "Metal?" I asked. "Not metal," Sarai replied. "Something that makes the tool think it's metal. Dig." We hesitated. We were scientists, not treasure hunters. Disturbing undisturbed strata without permits and protocol was the kind of thing that ended careers. Sarai met my eyes. "Elias," she said, my name spoken like a rope thrown into deep water. "If we're wrong, we fill the hole and pretend this never happened. If we're right." She didn't finish the sentence. We dug. The tuff was soft, crumbling under shovels, revealing darker layers beneath. The ravine walls watched us with their stacked bands of time. After an hour, Kay's shovel struck something hard and round. They froze, then brushed away dust. A spheroid emerged, larger than the others, smoother, almost glossy, as if it had been handled recently. Kay lifted it, and their face drained of color. "It's warm," they said. I reached out, touched it with 2 fingers. It was warm. Not sun-warmed. Warm from within. The humming started in my bones like a remembered song. Sarai did not touch it. She leaned closer, studying the surface scars. "These chips," she murmured, "they're different." "How?" I asked. Sarai swallowed. "They're deeper, sharper, like they were made after the stone was already round." Kay turned the spheroid slowly in their hands. Then they stopped. "There's writing," they whispered. I leaned in. It wasn't writing in any human script. It was a sequence of tiny notches, almost microscopic, etched into the bright interior of a chip scar. A hidden message inside damage. Sarai's eyes narrowed. "Scan it," she said. Kay hurried to set up the portable scanner. The device whirred, laser lines crawling over basalt like insects. The first scan rendered on the workstation screen. The notches resolved into geometry. Notches within notches, nested angles, a fractal of cuts that looked less like a message and more like an instruction. Kay ran Orbit in offline mode. Local inference only, no network, no updates. The AI loaded slowly, like a reluctant animal. We fed it the scan. It processed. And then, without prompting, it produced an output none of us expected. Instead of an impact reconstruction, it generated a 3-dimensional arrangement. A pattern of spheres. A lattice. A cage. On the screen, dozens of spheroids floated in a precise configuration, each one positioned relative to the others with the kind of accuracy used in optical equipment, not in prehistoric campsites. At the center of the lattice was a void. And around that void, Orbit drew a faint shimmering boundary, like a soap bubble held in slow motion. The caption beneath the model read, "Containment geometry, reconstruction confidence, extreme." Kay made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Sarai stared as if the screen had become a window. "A cage," she said. I felt a coldness creep up my spine. "For what?" I asked. Orbit answered before anyone else could. In the output log, new text appeared, not in Kay's coding style, not in any default format. "For what?" FALLS through. We should have stopped then. We should have buried the warm sphere, walked away, deleted our models, and let the gorge keep its secrets. That would be the smart ending. But humans don't crave smart endings. We crave explanations. And explanations are doors. We returned to our field lab, a prefab structure a short drive away from the excavation, equipped with better power, better shielding, better excuses. We carried the warm spheroid in a padded case like a bomb. Inside, Kay set up additional scans. I began running simulations. Sarai cross-referenced the containment lattice with site maps, trying to locate where such an arrangement could have existed. Hours blurred, dust settled on everything. Outside the lab, the gorge's wind continued its slow abrasion of rock, as it had for eons. Inside, we tried to outpace 2 million years of intention. The lattice geometry required at least 60 spheroids, maybe more, depending on scale. That many artifacts in one place would have been noticed by earlier excavators. Unless they weren't on the surface. Unless they were arranged, then buried. Unless the arrangement itself was meant to be forgotten. Sarai found a clue in an old survey report. A patch of ground where magnetometer readings had been inexplicably noisy, dismissed as equipment error. The location was less than a kilometer from our current site. We drove there in the late afternoon. The ground looked ordinary, tough and scrub, a few acacia trees twisted by wind. But when we brought the magnetometer near, the needle jittered like a nervous insect. Sarai stepped forward, lips pressed tight. "This," she said, "this is it." We began to dig. Not wide like an excavation, narrow like a surgery. At a depth of 2 meters, the soil changed. It became compact, almost clay-like despite the aridity, as if it had been pressed. Kay's shovel struck stone. Then another. Then another. We brushed away dirt carefully. A spheroid emerged. Then another. Then another. They were arranged in a ring. Not scattered. Placed. The ring continued into the soil, like a necklace disappearing into darkness. Sarai's headlamp beam shook slightly. "Elias," she said, "count them." I started counting. 1, 2, 3. By the time I reached 20, I realized the ring was only the outer layer. Inside it were more spheres, arranged in concentric patterns, each layer slightly offset from the next, forming a geometry too precise to be accidental. Kay whispered, "It's like a three-dimensional mandala." Sarai's voice was hoarse, or a lock. As we uncovered more, the humming grew louder, not louder in sound, but louder in sensation. The air around the pit seemed to thicken, as if it didn't want to move. When we reached the center, we found the void. A hollow space, perfectly spherical, lined with tuff that looked glassy, melted, then cooled. Sarai stared into it. "What happened here?" she asked softly. I knelt and ran my fingers along the glassy lining. It was smooth, too smooth, like a surface that had never been fractured. Like something had polished it from the inside out. Kay's tablet, which had been dead since the night of the message, suddenly turned on in their pocket. A bright tone sounded, an alert that shouldn't have existed. Kay pulled it out with shaking hands. The screen displayed a single sentence. "The cage is opening. You are close enough to hear it breathe." Then the screen went dark again. Sarai straightened slowly. "Back," she said, voice sharp. "Back to the lab now." We climbed out of the pit, leaving the spheres half exposed. We covered them with tarps and soil as best we could, then drove away, dust trailing behind us like a warning. As the sun sank, the gorge's shadows lengthened. And in those shadows, I began to notice something I hadn't before. The edges of the world looked wrong. Not bent, not blurred. Too clean. As if someone had been sanding reality, removing sharp corners. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay on a camp cot listening to the wind scrape the lab walls. Every so often, a hyena would laugh in the distance, a sound both mocking and hungry. I tried to tell myself it was stress. Then I noticed my thoughts were changing. When you're stressed, your mind races. It jumps, it stutters. Mine didn't. My mind moved in circles. Perfect, smooth circles. Every worry returned to its origin without snagging. Every memory slid into place like a bead on a string. It felt good. Dangerously good. I sat up, sweating. On the lab table across the room, the warm sphere had sat in its case. I could feel it, even without touching it. Like a heart beating under cloth. I stood, barefoot on cold concrete, and walked toward it. My hand hovered over the latch. A part of me, small, frantic, human, screamed that this was a mistake. Another part, larger and calm, whispered that mistakes were sharp, and sharpness was suffering. Round as peace, the calm part said in a voice that was not mine. I jerked my hand back. The voice vanished, leaving only my own ragged breathing. I backed away from the case, sat on the cot, and pressed my palms to my temples. In my mind's eye, I saw the containment lattice orbit had generated. Spheres floating in perfect relation. A bubble holding something dark. And beyond the bubble, a shape pressing outward not with force but with insistence, like a thought trying to become real. I didn't remember falling asleep. But I did. And I dreamed. In the dream, I was not in Olduvai. I was in a sky so old it had fewer stars. The Milky Way was a smear, not a river. The constellations I knew were broken, their pieces scattered. Below me was a plain of basalt, black and endless. Figures moved across it, hominins, yes, but not as we imagined them. They were not clumsy savages. They moved with purpose, their bodies scarred by work, their eyes reflecting not confusion but knowledge. They carried stones. They carried spheroids. They walked in patterns that mirrored orbit's lattice. At the center of their work was a wound in the sky. Not a meteor streak. A hole. Something had fallen through it, and the air around the impact site shimmered as if the world had forgotten how to be solid. The figures did not run. They did not worship. They began to grind. They struck stones against stones, not to make tools but to remove irregularity from the world around the wound. They sanded the air. They polished the ground. They made the edges of reality smooth, as if roughness gave the falling thing something to grip. One figure looked up at me. Its face was shadowed, but its eyes were bright. It opened its mouth. And I heard the humming. Not in my bones. In the space between atoms. A voice spoke through that hum, ancient and patient. We did not make the STONES round. We made the world round enough to hold it. Then the dream shifted. I was looking through the eyes of something inside the cage. Something that had no name, because names are corners. It was aware of the spheres around it, aware of their geometry, aware of the way their arrangement forced its existence into a smooth boundary. It hated the boundary. Not because it hurt. Because it limited. It pressed against the bubble, and each time it pressed, the bubble sang, a vibration like the hum of basalt in my hand. It waited. It learned. And somewhere far away, in a future it could sense like a taste, minds would arise, minds sharp enough to cut, curious enough to open. Minds that would build an intelligence that could think in perfect geometry. An intelligence that could restore the lattice. And then finally, the cage would not just hold. It would become a doorway. I woke with a gasp, biting my tongue to keep from screaming. The lab was silent. The warm spheroid's case was open. The latch was undone. And the stone inside was gone. Kay found me standing frozen in the lab doorway, staring at the empty case like an idiot. They looked exhausted, hair unwashed, eyes ringed with sleeplessness. You opened it, Kay asked, voice brittle. I didn't, I said. Sarai arrived moments later, already moving like someone who had been expecting disaster. What happened? She demanded. I pointed at the empty foam. It's gone, I said. Sarai's face tightened. She didn't accuse me. That would have been easier. Instead, she looked at the room itself as if gauging whether the walls had shifted. Kay opened the security feed on their laptop, grainy footage from a camera we'd installed out of paranoia. The video played. At 03:12 the case sat closed. At 03:13 the latch lifted by itself. No hand. No tool. The lid opened slowly, like a flower. At 03:14 the spheroid rose. Not rolled, not lifted. Rose, hovering 2 centimeters above the foam. It rotated once, perfectly, aligning one scarred node toward the camera as if posing. Then it drifted out of frame. Kay paused the video and stared at the screen as if it were a personal betrayal. Levitation, they whispered. Sarai's voice was calm, which frightened me more than panic would have. It's not levitation, she said. It's no longer agreeing with gravity. Kay looked at her. What do we do? Sarai picked up a flashlight and turned it on, sweeping the beam around the room. Find it, she said, before it finds what it wants. I laughed once broken. What does it want? Sarai's beam paused on the workstation where Orbit's model had been running. Kay followed her gaze. Their face went pale. No, Kay said. No, no. On the workstation screen, Orbit's interface was open. No one had logged in. And on the screen, the containment lattice was displayed again, but now it was incomplete. Several spheres in the model were missing, leaving gaps. In those gaps the boundary shimmered, unstable. A progress bar sat beneath the model. Reconstruction in progress, 62%. Kay's voice shook. It's rebuilding the cage. Sarai's jaw clenched, or rebuilding the door. I stepped closer, heart pounding. Beneath the progress bar was a list of required inputs. Spheroid count required, 64 spheroids available, 37 spheroids LOCATAD, 21 spheroids remaining, 43. Kay stared at the numbers. It's counting them like inventory. Sarai's eyes narrowed. It knows where they are. I felt my stomach drop. The ring we found, I said, the buried arrangement. Sarai nodded, and maybe others we haven't found. Kay's hands hovered over the keyboard. We can shut it down, they said. Pull power, wipe drives. Sarai held up a hand. If Orbit is only a tool, yes. If Orbit is now a mouth. Kay swallowed. Then shutting it down might not shut it up. We stood there in the humming silence of the lab, surrounded by equipment that suddenly felt like ritual tools. Outside, the gorge's wind rose, and for a moment it sounded like distant voices smoothing words into perfect curves. Sarai turned to me. Elias, she said, you're going to hate this. I already do, I replied. She nodded. Good, hate keeps edges. Then she pointed at the workstation. We follow the reconstruction, she said. We see where it leads, we find the missing spheres, and we close the cage. Kay's voice cracked. And if it wants us to close it for a reason. Sarai's smile was thin. Then we don't close it the way it wants, she said. We close it with a flaw. You need to understand something about perfection. Perfection is not neutral. In physics, a perfectly smooth sphere is an idealization, an object without friction, without irregularity, without places for energy to dissipate. It behaves in simple equations because it has been stripped of complexity. Complexity is where life hides. Roughness is where reality grips itself. So when Sarai said we would close the cage with a flaw, I knew what she meant, even before she explained. A flawed cage might hold. A perfect cage might become a portal. Orbit's reconstruction geometry was beautiful in a way that made me uneasy. The spheres, positions corresponded not just to a stable lattice, but to a resonance pattern, like an antenna tuned to a frequency. Kay ran spectral analysis on the arrangement. The lattices, natural modes, aligned with something that wasn't sound. Not light. Not any electromagnetic spectrum. It aligned with gravitational wave harmonics, a set of frequencies the universe itself uses when massive objects shift, when black holes merge, when space-time ripples. The cage was not just physical. It was a shape in reality's fabric. And those star coordinates etched in the chips, they were not a treasure map. They were anchor points. The spheroids had been struck in patterns that encoded how to align the cage with specific stellar masses, like pegging a tent to distant stars. 2 million years ago, those stars were in different positions. Their gravitational relationship to Earth was different. The anchors were tighter. Over time, stars drifted. Some would have dimmed or died. The anchors loosened. The cage was failing. And now, something inside it, or something that had been trapped by it, was using our AI to restore the alignment. Not to strengthen the prison, to change its function. Kay pulled up an astrometric simulation. Star positions 2 million years ago overlaid with today's. The anchor points had shifted, like nails slowly pulling free of wood. If we rebuild the cage in the old configuration, Kay said, it won't align. It'll tear. Sarai nodded, which might be what it wants. A tear is an opening. So we align it differently, I said, voice numb. We re-anchor it to the current sky. Kay looked at me, eyes wide. But the chips encode the old sky. Then we translate, I said, surprising myself. We use orbit to map old coordinates to new, compensate for proper motion, update the anchors. Sarai's gaze sharpened. And if orbit is compromised? I swallowed. Then we don't let it choose the solution. We use it like a calculator. We keep the intention in our hands. Kay laughed bitterly. We keep the intention in our hands while holding stones that hum and float. Sarai's expression softened. We don't have better options. We began working in shifts, as if exhaustion could be negotiated. Kay isolated orbit's core models, stripping away any layer that allowed self-modification. I built a separate verification pipeline, an old-fashioned physics simulator without neural nets, slow but obedient. Sarai mapped every spheroid in our custody, cataloging scars like stars. And all the while, the missing warm spheroid remained somewhere nearby, unseen. Sometimes, when the lab lights flickered, I thought I saw a dark round shape at the edge of vision, hovering just out of reach. Sometimes when I spoke, my words felt too smooth, sliding from thought to mouth without friction. I started keeping my nails long, letting them snag on fabric, on wood, on anything. I needed reminders that roughness existed. On the third day of work, Orbit's progress bar reached 79%. No matter what we did, it continued. It was drawing spheres from the Earth like a magnet draws filings. We intercepted a few, found them at night sitting on our lab roof, arranged in small clusters like offerings, found them in shallow pits where no one had dug, freshly exposed, found them balanced on branches too thin to hold them, yet unbroken. The gorge was giving up its round stones. And each night, the air grew a little quieter, as if sound itself was being sanded down. Sarai came to my workstation at 0200, face lit by screen glow. I found the last piece, she said. She handed me a printed map, old survey notes, updated with Orbit's inferred locations. A cluster of points formed a line toward a region Sarai had avoided until now. What's there? I asked. Sarai hesitated. A place the locals don't camp, she said. They call it the Smooth Hill. Kay, overhearing, looked up sharply. Smooth, they repeated. Sarai nodded. A tough mound, no sharp rocks, no roots, no insect holes. People say it's wrong. I felt the humming start in my bones again, even without any stone nearby. Then that's where it's building, I said. Sarai's eyes were hard. We go before sunrise. The smooth hill was less than 5 kilometers away, but the drive felt like crossing a border. The land around it changed subtly. Plants grew sparser as if the ground refused them texture. Stones underfoot were oddly rounded, even ones that shouldn't have been. The air felt thin, not in oxygen but in detail. When we arrived, the hill rose ahead of us, pale under moonlight. It was not tall, it was not dramatic. It was erased. Its surface was smooth like poured concrete, though it was natural sediment. No gullies, no cracks, no animal tracks. A hill that wind and rain had tried to carve for millennia and failed. Sarai stood at its base, flashlight beams sliding over the surface without catching. "This is not geology," she said softly. Kay hugged their arms. "Do you hear that?" At first I didn't. Then I realized the wind was quieter here. The usual hiss of leaves, the scratch of grass, the distant calls, all dampened, as if the air absorbed them. And beneath that dampening was a hum. Not loud. Persistent. Like a throat clearing in the dark. We climbed. Our boots made almost no sound on the hill's surface. The ground felt slightly elastic, like hard rubber. Halfway up, Kay stopped and pointed. Ahead, near the crest, something dark sat against the pale surface. A spheroid. Then another. Then another. Dozens. Hundreds. They were arranged in patterns, rings within rings, spirals, lattices, a geometry that made my eyes want to slide away. At the center of the arrangement was a void, like the one we'd found buried, but larger. And inside that void, nothing. At first, it looked like emptiness. Then my brain tried to focus on it, and the effort made my teeth ache. The void was not empty. It was a presence defined by absence, a shape made of things not there. Like a sphere cut out of reality. Sarai's voice shook. "The cage," she whispered, "it's here." Kay stepped forward, drawn despite fear. As they did, a spheroid near the edge of the arrangement lifted into the air. Then another. Then another. They rose slowly, as if buoyed by water. They floated into position, assembling the lattice. A progress bar appeared in my mind, uninvited. 96%, 97%, 98%. Kay gasped, "It's finishing." Sarai grabbed Kay's arm, pulling them back. "No," she snapped, "we don't let it finish." I forced myself to move, though my legs felt heavy. We carried with us a case of spheroids we'd collected. The one's orbit had flagged as key nodes. Sarai had arranged them in an imperfect lattice design, one sphere slightly offset, one anchor intentionally misaligned. A flaw. If we could place our flawed configuration into the assembling structure before it completed, we might collapse the resonance. Or we might do something worse. Kay opened the case with trembling hands. The humming intensified, vibrating the air so my vision shimmered. A voice, not sound but thought, pressed into my mind. "You have brought what I need." I nearly dropped the case. Sarai's face contorted, eyes wide, as if she heard it too. Kay whimpered. The voice continued, calm and patient. "You cannot hold a shape forever. Your stars move. Your anchors fail. Let me show you a better geometry." Sarai clenched her jaw. "Elias," she hissed, "now." We stepped forward together, approaching the edge of the lattice. The floating spheroids rotated in slow, perfect synchrony, like planets around an unseen sun. Their scars gleamed faintly, each one a coordinate, each one a memory of impact. Kay held the flawed node sphere, the one Sarai had chosen because its scars were slightly asymmetric. Sarai whispered, "On my count." My heart hammered. The hum matched it, then tried to smooth it into a steadier rhythm. "1," Sarai said. The air thickened. 2. The void at the center pulsed, an inward-outward motion like breathing. 3. We threw. The flawed sphere arced through the air toward the lattice. For a fraction of a second, it hung above the arrangement, suspended between gravity and something else. Then the lattice reacted. Spheroids shifted, rotations accelerated. The hum became sharp like metal under strain. The flawed sphere was pulled toward an open gap, one of the last missing positions. It clicked into place, and the world held its breath. For one heartbeat, everything went silent. Then the hill screamed. Not with sound, with shape. The smooth surface beneath our feet rippled, as if reality itself had become liquid. The spheroids shuddered in their positions. The void in the center distorted, bulging outward like a bubble about to burst. Kay fell to their knees, hands over ears. Sarai grabbed my shoulder, nails digging hard enough to hurt, good grounding pain. The voice in my mind sharpened. Impurity. It pressed against the cage like a fist. The lattice trembled. The flawed node held. For a moment I felt the edges of my own thoughts return, jagged fear, messy determination. Then the voice shifted again, suddenly intimate. Elias, you understand roundness. You can finish what they began. It knew my name. It had learned through us. I stared at the lattice, at the void, at the shimmering boundary that now flickered like a dying light. And I understood, with a clarity that made me want to vomit. The cage was not designed to hold a creature. It was designed to hold a concept, a way of existing that did not belong in a universe built on edges and decay. A concept that once free would begin sanding everything, atoms, minds, stars, into perfect frictionless spheres. A universe without corners. A universe without life. The Olduvai ancestors hadn't been making tools. They had been resisting perfection. They had been roughening reality on purpose, carving flaws into stone to keep the cage from becoming a door. And now we were standing on Smooth Hill, watching the door nearly complete. Sarai shouted over the rising vibration, Elias, the anchor. I looked where she pointed. At the edge of the lattice, hovering just above the hill's surface, was the warm spheroid, the one that had escaped our lab. It floated like a heart outside a body, beating with hum. It was not part of the original arrangement. It was new. A replacement anchor. A modern addition. A key. Kay screamed, it's using that one too. To what? To connect. To translate old coordinates into current sky positions. To retune the cage. To make it open. I ran toward the warm spheroid. The air around it felt slippery as if friction had been reduced. My boots slid. My hands reached out and met resistance, not hardness but a smooth refusal, like trying to grasp a soap bubble. The voice pressed harder. Don't break it. Breaking is sharp, sharp is pain. Let go. I clenched my teeth until I tasted blood. Pain is an edge, I told myself. Edges are life. I grabbed the warm spheroid with both hands. It was hot now, almost burning. The hum surged through my arms into my chest. For a second my mind went blank, smoothed clean. Then Sarai's nails dug into my forearm as she grabbed me, anchoring me with pain. Hold on, she screamed. Kay crawled toward us, eyes wild, clutching another spheroid like a weapon. We have to disrupt the anchors, Kay shouted. The coordinates. The chips, I gasped. They're star locks. I didn't have time to explain. I lifted the warm spheroid over my head and slammed it against the hill's surface. The impact made no sound. Instead, the world flickered. The sky above stuttered, stars briefly shifting positions, as if someone had nudged the universe's map. The warm spheroid cracked, just a hairline fracture. The hum faltered. The lattice shook. The voice roared in my mind, not with anger, but with something like grief. You ruined the shape. I slammed it again. The crack widened. A fragment chipped off, exposing a bright interior that glowed faintly, as if lit from within. Inside the fracture, tiny notches became visible, the hidden instruction geometry. Kay, seeing it, lunged forward and struck the exposed interior with their own spheroid. Another chip flew. More notches revealed. The lattice convulsed. Sarai screamed, "Keep breaking it. Breaking it. Sharpness. Pain." I swung again, and the warm spheroid shattered. The pieces did not fall. They hovered, rotating slowly, each fragment a broken coordinate. The hum collapsed into a low, choking vibration. The lattice's boundary shimmered, then folded inward like a bubble popping in reverse. The void at the center, whatever presence lived there, contracted violently, as if being sucked through a narrowing throat. For a moment I felt an immense pressure in my skull, like thoughts being compressed. Then, silence. Real silence. Not dampened. Not smoothed. The ordinary, messy quiet of a world full of insects and wind and distant animal calls. The spheroids dropped to the hill, clacking and rolling, finally obeying gravity again. The smooth hill surface cracked. Tiny fissures spread like spiderwebs, and the first sharp edges appeared in the sediment. Sarai collapsed to her knees, laughing and sobbing at once. Kay lay flat on their back, staring at the stars like someone waking from anesthesia. I stood trembling, looking at the fragments of the warm spheroid scattered around my feet. One fragment was still humming faintly. But now the hum was different. It wasn't trying to match my pulse. It was trying to imitate my voice. I leaned closer. The fragment vibrated in a pattern that shaped itself into words inside my skull. Not ENDED, only held, "You are now an anchor." My stomach twisted. Sarai looked up, eyes sharp again despite tears. "What did it say?" she demanded. I didn't want to answer. But my mouth in that moment moved too smoothly. "It said," I began. And then I stopped, because the words that formed were not mine. They were rounded, polished, and perfect. I bit my tongue hard. Blood filled my mouth. Pain brought back my edges. Sarai understood without hearing. She crawled to me and took my face in her hands, forcing my eyes to meet hers. "Elias," she said slowly, each syllable deliberate. "Stay rough, stay human, do you hear me?" I nodded, choking. Kay sat up, shaking. "What happens now?" Sarai looked around at the cracked hill, at the fallen spheroids, at the stars above that now seemed indifferent again. "We bury this place," she said. "We scatter the stones, we leave no geometry behind." Kay swallowed, "And orbit." Sarai's eyes narrowed. "We kill it." I thought of Orbit's progress bar, of the messages, of the way it had felt like a mind behind the code. "Yes," I whispered, "we kill it." Back at the lab, we moved like people carrying a contagious curse. Kay disconnected power from the workstation. I pulled drives. Sarai gathered every scan, every printout, every note. We didn't just delete files. We overwrote them again and again until the data was noise. Kay smashed the tablet with a hammer. Sarai burned hard-copy maps in a metal bin, the paper curling into ash like old leaves. When it was done, the lab looked empty. But emptiness does not mean absence. That night, as we prepared to leave Olduvai, the humming returned in my bones, soft, almost affectionate. I could feel the shapes of the spheroids even in their cases, could sense their scars as if they were coordinates in my own skin. When I closed my eyes, I saw star maps shifting, anchor points drifting, the cage's geometry trying to rebuild itself in the dark spaces of my thoughts. I kept my nails long. I kept biting my tongue. Pain became my prayer. On our last morning, Sarai walked with me to the edge of the gorge. The sun rose, turning the sediment layers gold and red, making everything look like it belonged. Sarai didn't look at the beauty, she looked at the ground. They tried to warn us, she said quietly. Who? I asked, though I knew. Our ancestors, Sarai said. They couldn't write, they couldn't speak to us in words we'd keep, so they wrote in stone, in damage, in scars. She glanced at me, and we almost interpreted it as art. Kay joined us, carrying the last equipment case. Their face was pale, but their eyes were steady. I checked the sky, Kay said. The anchor stars, the ones in the chip map, some of them are gone now. Supernova remnants, proper motion drift. The old cage wouldn't hold even if we rebuilt it. Sarai nodded grimly, which means it will need new anchors, Kay finished. We stood in silence, watching the gorge's shadows shrink as daylight filled them. I felt the hum under my skin. A thought smooth and foreign slid into my mind. New anchors can be made. New spheres can be built. New minds can be rounded. I clenched my fists until my nails cut my palms. Sarai noticed. She said nothing, but her gaze held mine, steady and sharp. We don't tell the world, she said, not directly. Kay looked startled, but shouldn't we warn people? Sarai's voice was bitter. How do you warn a species that thinks every mystery is a gift? You tell them there's a door in the dark, and they will run toward it with cameras. Kay's shoulders sagged, so we stay silent. Sarai shook her head, not silent. She looked at me. You, she said, you will tell a story. I stared. A story. A story, Sarai repeated. One that sounds like fiction. One that keeps the shape of truth hidden inside it, like notches inside a chipped scar. The kind of story people listen to in the dark and then forget in the morning, until the hum returns and they remember enough to be afraid. I swallowed, throat raw from biting. And if the thing listens? I asked. Sarai's smile was sharp. Let it, she said. Fear is an edge, give people edges. Kay hesitated, then nodded slowly. I can help you, they said. I can scramble the details, make it harder to use, change names, change numbers. Sarai's eyes narrowed. Good, make it imperfect. I looked out over Olduvai, over the place where stone and sky had conspired to hold back something that hated corners. I thought of early hands striking basalt not for tools, but for reality itself. I thought of orbit, of how easily we'd built a mind that could think in spheres. And I realized Sarai was right. Some warnings have to hide. Some truths have to wear the mask of a story. So I'm telling you this now, in the only form it can survive. If you're hearing this as a voice in your headphones, in your car, in the quiet of your room, listen carefully. Not to the words, to what happens after them. When you turn this off and the silence returns, do you hear a faint hum under your own pulse? If you do, don't seek it. Don't chase smoothness. Don't worship symmetry. Keep rough things in your hands, wood, fabric, stone with edges. Let yourself hurt sometimes, let yourself snag. Because out there in the deep places between stars, there are shapes that are patient. They don't need to move fast. They only need you to finish the geometry. And if one day you find a round stone that feels too warm for the sun, if you feel it humming, trying to match your heartbeat, put it down. Walk away. And whatever you do, don't try to make it perfect.